So it's wonderful to be here with you today, Ludmila. You are, of course, an eminent, prolific author, a researcher, speaker on all things neurodiversity and inclusion. And congratulations for your book, your tour de force, Canary Code, in short. I'm really grateful you've written this book because it's such an important, relevant topic. It's one that's close to my heart professionally and personally, because also, frankly, in many organizations, neurodiversity is misunderstood still and mispracticed. So we're going to delve into what is it? What does it mean? What's the impact when it's not being practiced well? And most importantly, what can we as leaders do all about it? But first, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. I'm so thrilled to be talking to you. I love your work, everything you do for HBR and MIT Sloan Management Review. I read, I love it. You just have great way of thinking about leadership that's fresh on a topic that has been around for thousands of years. And again, I'm grateful to be here and talk to you about my favorite topic, which is neurodiversity and neuroinclusion in the workplace.
Fantastic. Well, that was very kind. It was unexpected and definitely unscripted. So that's very kind. What a lovely opening. So let's get everybody on the same page, because this is a topic that some people may know something about. Some people may have experience of it. Others, they may be new to it. So let's talk about what it means in practice. And when we talk about neurodiversity, neurodifferences, give me some examples of what that means in language that perhaps people may be more familiar with.
That language evolved, but some people are on different levels or on maybe different sources of understanding for what it means. So I'll go a little bit into history. And the term neurodiversity, which is neurological diversity, originates from 1990s. When the first internet chat rooms and mail serves became available, that was a very important time for people who before were kind of on push to the edges of society, now had a chance to create their own culture. And specifically autistic people, or at the time we're using the term Asperger's, we don't use that anymore, but in those chat rooms and mail serves, that's where the idea of neurological diversity was born, as diversity rather than a medical condition and some horrible thing we needed to get rid of. It was just a different way of being in the world, different way of thinking about the world, not inferior, but in some ways maybe struggling with some aspects of society, and in some ways very adaptive and useful. And then this word was used by Harvey Bloom in a famous Atlantic article, and by Judy Singer in an academic thesis, and that is how it became something that the general culture was more aware of. And very quickly, people started using it for other types of differences. So at first, it would be learning differences like dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, Tourette. And then very quickly, people also started using it for all kinds of differences. So anything that you can think of, from PTSD, anxiety, to brain injury, and now we could even talk about long COVID as a version of neurodivergence. And some people would even talk about like temporarily altered mental state, even though not everyone would agree on such a broad definition, but it became a much broader concept. So in addition, then Nick Walker invented another term, neurominority, which kind of became what the original term neurodivergent person was. People who are born different, whose wiring is different because of her
Yes.
brain developed early in the childhood. So usually autistic, ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette's would fall into that category. And sometimes people use neurominority and neurodivergent people interchangeably, but neurodivergent is generally a broader term. Neurominority is more of a
Yes.
specific to developmental differences. And then society does not appreciate those differences, so that's a problem.
Yes, well, we'll definitely come on to that. That's such a great articulation, and I bet people listening or watching this will either empathize because their own experience, or they'll know people and their colleagues, co-workers, family, friends. Give us a sense of how prevalent these this neurodiversity is, because when some people talk about it, they think, oh, it's just a small selection of people. Then when you have that broader definition of diversity, and listening to what you just said, I think actually that could be quite a substantial proportion of the working population. Can you give us a sense of its prevalence?
It's quite a substantial proportion. So even if you're thinking about autism, it's not 1% as the older estimates are, but more like 2.7 and maybe even closer to 3%. And there's still many undiagnosed people, especially women, Black and brown people who have difficulty accessing diagnosis,
Yes.
people from generations who didn't have an opportunity to receive diagnosis as children. And then ADHD estimates are even higher. Some people say 4 to 5%. Some people say even 10% or maybe even more. And then dyslexia is also quite prevalent. Now, they often overlap. So people might have more than
Yes.
one form of neurodivergence. And so there are many people who say they're both autistic and ADHDers. And I'm using identity first language as preferred by those communities. And there are many people who might be dyslexic and ADHDers. So there's quite a bit of overlap. The typical estimate is about 15 to 20% of the population, and that only usually including neurominorities, not even including the broader range, because if you include mental health differences or long COVID, that is going to be a much higher percentage. And actually, among Gen Zs, according to some studies, and again, there might be some sampling differences depending on who they were sampling within that generation, but up to 50% of Gen Zs report being in some form neurodivergent, probably based on the broader definition. But it's a very interesting picture. But the relatively conservative estimate is 15%, but it's probably more like 20 or higher.
Well, it's very substantial. And I guess it is a broad category of people, or even though I know, I mean, from my own son's experience, you have often multiple, what would you call them? Multiple, I don't like the word conditions because that's a medical term. It's a term that's been used for my son. How would you describe them? Characteristics?
I use characteristics or differences. Sometimes people use the word neurotypes to normalize it.
Yeah.
And sometimes people use the word disability. I know some people think that disability is a bad word. And sometimes we kind of say neurodivergence is never a disability, which is a little bit stretching it because some people do experience it as disability, but people who don't want it to be referred to that. So difference.
No, it's a very personal. I know from my own experience with my son. Sometimes the labels can be helpful in terms of accessing support, but often it can be used as a generalization that misses out his own unique characteristics. But if you had to generalize now and look at the experience of this group of people in the workplace, and I know every experience is unique, of course, but if you had to generalize, what's a typical experience that this group of people has? And I know it's not positive. There will be some positive experiences, but candidly, it's very challenging. Can you give us a picture, if you like?
Well, one picture that many people use is a square peg and round hole, where people are trying to force you into something that they're not, rather than working with who you are. And another imagery that I use is a canary in the coal mine. And that refers to the fact that neurodivergent people feel the same issues that other people feel in the workplace. The difference is that someone who is neurotypical might get over time really stressed out after working in the open office. Someone who is autistic is going to get physically sick from working in the open office pretty quickly. Not every person who is autistic, but someone who is highly sensory sensitive, which many autistic people are, and some of ADHDers, and you can have also sensory issues without those particular differences, those particular labels. Some people are going to be overwhelmed to the point of being incapacitated, and sometimes we call it, social disablement. I have a perfectly good brain. My brain can go for hours and hours. When I was an interpreter, I would go for 9 hours of simultaneous interpreting. That's basically considered impossible.
Wow.
But, 30 minutes is a norm. However, put me in a noisy office and I'm useless. Or just put me in any kind of noisy situation, my brain shuts down. So it's not like I'm not broken, but when an environment is such that my brain, which by design processes more information than the average person, that's characteristic of autistic people. Our brains process more information in any given time at rest. So when there's more stimulus coming at us, we become overwhelmed faster than the average person. Again, it's not necessarily a bug because our brains can do some very interesting things, but in an environment that's designed for someone who is less sensitive to stimulus, we become overwhelmed. However, again, things like open offices or toxic leadership, bullying, all those things are not good for anyone. The problem is for neurodivergent people is that we are more likely to get bullied. We're more likely to get overwhelmed by poorly designed, stressful work environments. And so that kind of makes us...
Can I just interject there? You're covering so many points that I really want to delve into it. It's wonderful and hard to hear at the same time. You talked about bullying there. What leads, and I know a number of people sadly get bullied for a number of different reasons, but what leads people who are neurodivergent to be more likely to be bullied? What are the conditions and that leads to that picture?
Before I place it on individuals, I'm going to place it on systems and how systems are designed. Many organizations are designed with unnecessary internal competition, and there are also no protections and nor civility norms. So that creates environments that allow for bullying. Now, within that, why some people are more likely to be chosen as targets, and I never want to put it on targets because they say, if you just do XYZ, you don't get bullied. I don't like that. It's a bully's choice to bully, and environments allow them to do it. But certain targets are picked. Sometimes people just pick up on something different. So when it comes to neurodivergent people just pick up that something is different they can't put their finger on, and that to some people is enough. It can also have something to do with productivity. And again, not every neurodivergent person is super productive, but if we're well matched to our work tasks, we can be. And there is a phenomenon that's called bullying of high performers. People don't like those who are overperforming. So you can be bullied because you're doing really well and because you're focusing on your work and not participating in all the water cooler stuff, and people pick on you because you're a high performer and because they think you're not a part of the in crowd. Sometimes people are also bullied if they're low performers and they struggle with something. So let's say someone is mismatched with their tasks and is doing something that they're not really good at. You can also get bullied for that, but there is research that shows that high performers are actually at a very high risk of bullying. So there's a variety of factors, and then again, environmental factors that allow things who would bully others, either out of envy or because they feel insecure and they need to be bringing other people down, or there's just unhealthy competition and they feel like they're going to better themselves if they bring a coworker down. Maybe like there are unspoken rules, norms that will actually give you promotion for that. So unhealthy systems might allow for those behaviors to manifest.
Yes. It's interesting. My own experience of not of work but of school, where I was a high performer who sounded different in terms of my accent from others, led to years of bullying in different shapes or form. So I can empathise with that.
Mm-hmm.
You touched there on people being given, I guess, the space to craft the roles that play to their strengths, and obviously the organisational cultures that encourage that. Whenever I hear of different elements of diversity, particularly neurodiversity, I hear of HR leaders or managers talk about making adjustments. And I have two reactions to that. One is, well, great, they're recognising the need for difference. But then I think of adjustments, and I think that means you're sort of on the outside, or you're not quite, in the centre of an organisation. Firstly, what's your reaction to the word adjustment? Because it is quite, I think you have a different word in the US, but it's a different. What's your reaction to that? Is that something you think, yeah, absolutely, that's fair, or does it provoke a negative reaction?
Well, US word accommodations is worse, according to most people in the community, because that really feels like, oh, we're just doing those special things for you, and special is not always a good thing. And then adjustments, again, could be an othering thing. It sounds kinder than accommodations, and maybe it's just like, everyone could have some kinds of adjustments because, we all adjust our cameras before we start a podcast, for example. So it's not a big deal, but others might still feel like it's very othering. And I think US is more likely to require medical documentation for accommodations than in the UK. Sometimes you can get adjustments even without necessarily doctor's note, but that's still another barrier. It's not always that easy to go and get a doctor's note. And so that's another barrier to something that really should be thought of as a performance enhancement. So why can't we just think about something that is helping a person to work on their best? So let's say if you're a high performer at school, schools are harder because you kind of have to get everyone to a certain level of literacy, but that can also create issues because we're trying to fit every kid into that average box, and we know that we don't all fit, and then people get bullied and other very negative things happen, or people lose their self-esteem because they kind of know they're smart, but the school is telling them the opposite because there's a particular thing they struggle with, like reading for dyslexic people, and they just made feel like they're less than, even though the school just doesn't call on their particular talents. In the workplace, in some ways, it's actually easier to match people with the right task and the right thing than in most education systems, unless there's a significant streaming. Like in Germany, there's a little bit more, let's say, than in the US or UK. But in the workplace, we don't need the same person doing the same thing. We need different kinds of people doing different kinds of tasks. So what we need to do is not even necessarily accommodations, but job matching. If I'm good at certain things and horrible at others, why would you accommodate me to do things that I'm horrible at? I'm still not going to be the best. But it makes the most sense to take my talents and match me with the right job. You don't even need job crafting. That might be the next line of defense. If necessary, you can
Yes.
also tweak with something. But sometimes if you match someone well to a job, they can just do it without any kind of adjustments. So, like, I never needed adjustments as a translator because that's just what my brain does. I never needed adjustments as a university professor, but because my brain just kind of does that sort of thing. The only problems I would have is when they would throw additional responsibilities that are not core to the job at me and would want me to like attend loud events, which is not the typical part of what university professors do, or just do someone else's job, like someone goes on leave or someone gets laid off, which happens in organizations, and someone gets thrown
Yeah.
additional other job on them, and they might have an issue with it. But if you don't do it, if you just match people to what they're good at and let them do it, and then hire another person who is different and match them to another job, we may reduce the need for accommodations and adjustments very significantly.
Let's just focus on matching and crafting there, because you're making a really important point that if you are matched well, you don't need the accommodations. I guess if we take that argument further, how, if you're a leader of a team and say you have a new recruit or you have an existing team member and you are of the mindset where you want people to do their best work, but how do you create that matching? How do you encourage people to either create a better match or create the conditions in which they can reveal their strengths? Because I think when people hear what you said, you think it's very persuasive, it's very articulate. Question is, how do you do it in practice? How would you have that conversation? Imagine you were new to a team and you were with the boss of that team and you wanted to try and get the best match possible. How would you go about it? Any tips or thoughts?
I would start with hiring before the person is hired, and with job development, because very often when people post a job, they throw in whatever. So, like the literal example, someone who needs to do statistical analysis while being interrupted by random questions. Doesn't make any sense. Nobody's able to do that job. And the person who is best at statistical analysis is probably not going to be the kind of person who works well with interruptions. So why create something that doesn't make any sense? Create a job of an analyst and don't throw answering phones into it. The same thing, create a job that makes sense for another set of strengths that we know typically go together in an actual human, not in some kind of mythical creature that people sometimes think, I'm going to hire someone who is going to, do my strategic planning and sing karaoke for some reason, because that's what many job descriptions read like. So if you create actual jobs for actual strengths that people have and that you need, obviously, and then you do proper selection with valid instruments where you measure those specific skills that are bona fide requirements, not random things, but requirements for this specific job. You're hiring an accountant, give them a 30-minute accounting task. You are hiring a salesperson, by all means, give them a test of how they would pitch something. But what happens in reality is that we force accountants to do sales, because that's what really interviews often are. And we ask people to do completely irrelevant things in hiring them. So then people who would have been incredible in data analysis or accounting, but they're not really good at talking themselves up, which is not a job requirement for being an accountant, end up being eliminated. So you don't even hire the right people that you want because you don't have a valid system for hiring. And then you end up with a bunch of clones who, maybe the boss just wanted people who are like Clone Wars, Star Wars, all the same. So you end up with a bunch of people who are the same. And then you run into a system that everybody wants to do A and nobody wants to do B, and they're all fighting because everybody hates B and everybody wants to do A.
Absolutely.
Higher diversity of people, and someone is going to want to do A and be good at that. Someone is going to want to do B and be good at that, and C and whatever else you need. So just be realistic and hire for things that you actually need, and hire people who are good at that specific thing. That is going to give you a very significant advantage in productivity, because now you have, let's say, 3 people. One is really good at A, one is really good at B, and one is really good at C. And they're all doing what they're good at. Otherwise, you're going to hire the average person who can somewhat make their way through all of that, but you're not going to get the same performance as if you hire 3 very different people with very different complementary skill sets. So it's really not that hard, but you need to think about the nature of jobs and then humans.
I put my strategy hat on, which is always on, I hasten to add. I think that's so compelling. I mean, any organization needs distinctive capabilities to win, to stand out. And yet many performance systems go back to the clones and the average, maybe because it's easier, it feels easier, or it's laziness or whatever. But I can think of examples both in my past and in clients I worked with where they talk about the need for specialists in a particular area and diversity of skills and so forth. And then you get to the performance conversation and it's one role type. And anyone who's different effectively is considered, oh, they're a bit different, but actually they get marked down for it. I want to continue this theme of scenarios to make this feel even more real. I mean, it is very real and very tangible already. But imagine you're leading a team, and you have a sense that some or one of your team has some of these characteristics. You're not there to judge them. You're not there to solve things for them, but you want to create the conditions in which they can, I guess, express the type of work that they're looking for, how they want to work, and whatever other needs they have, without, and you've written a great article on this, without necessarily asking them to disclose more than they feel comfortable with. How do you create the conditions in which people can share what they need from their leaders, from their co-workers to do their best work? What does it take? What does it involve?
You could help them to trust in you, but I would prefer even a more systemic approach where we normalize differences. And there are companies like Alternate that use little forms like user manual for everyone. The assumption is that everyone is different, and it's fine to be different. So people say, I work best under conditions, whatever. This triggers me. I prefer feedback in, written form, verbal form, on the phone, in person, at the end of the week, so I can have process immediately, so I can correct immediately. And we just normalize those types of differences. And everyone does it. You don't need to single anyone out. And then managers can take this information.
That's the thing. That's the thing, right? If you make it that, in a way, it's something available for everyone and an ingredient of high performance, this is what you keep coming back to. You're trying to understand what it takes to perform your best. Then it's not like, oh, the majority are over here and we just have a machine for them and we have a few adjustments for accommodation and special requests and so on for people over here. It's all integrated. It's one system. And you're trying to reveal and then match and then craft the best jobs to the best, to what's needed for the organization to win for customers. There's a coherence to all of this, right?
Exactly. We create systems that really just make sense because we want productive organizations. And in productive organizations, we want to match strengths to specific jobs. And if we are realistic, we know that people have different strengths. Even machines are made for particular purpose and not for everything. And if we just match someone who is good at this particular thing and someone who is good at that particular thing and let them work in ways they do best, we really are going
Yes.
to have much better productivity, but also easier lives for managers because they don't have to stand over the head, with a big club and threaten you with things. If you're doing what you're good at and what you're more likely to intrinsically enjoy, and you have a team that's well matched for all those different aspects of the job, you're less likely to have conflicts and bullying and all kinds of other issues. Obviously, they're current because humans will be humans, but it is much
Sure.
less likely that this kind of healthy work environment where things make sense is going to trigger a problematic situation.
It's so compelling. And you're putting it right in the center of business, not as a special initiative or an HR initiative. This is right at the center. Let me put a couple of challenges then that may come across your desk or you may have heard of, read of. One would be some organizations are already in flight with a number of I'll loosely call them diversity initiatives, and it's more than that, but it's inclusion and belonging, and it might be around gender, race, sexuality, and so forth. And they might think, don't shoot the messenger, but they might think, God, we're not even making progress on some of those initiatives. And here's a, inverted commas, new one. It's not new, but new to them that we haven't dealt with before. Gosh, let us deal with the others first. What do you say to them?
I say that I can make their lives a lot easier because this is how a lot of those DI initiatives look like. You have all kinds of barriers to hiring, barriers to promotion, let's say for women. And you're like, okay, we're going to give women ladders and help them climb over that barrier. And that's what many of those initiatives look like. And then you're like, wait, so there's some women who are wheelchair users. We need to build a ramp for them. So then you're building a ramp. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute. Well, some people are blind. So we also need to do another special kind of ladder or special kind of ramp. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, those some people are from different country and they are using a second language. Let's do something for that. That doesn't make any sense. Why is the barrier there to begin with? If the barrier is really
Indeed.
not relevant, and then we have to give every group their own ladder and ramp and whatever other thing, it doesn't make sense. Let's just take down the barrier. And that is going to enable everyone to do their best work. And the barrier could be the hiring system, and everyone has to go through interviews, and people are evaluated on all kinds of things from their facial symmetry to their regional accent to whatever else people assume based on your physical look. And then we don't end up even with best people being hired. Another barrier could be work organization and the lack of flexibility. And, well, women are more likely to be doing more things at home, statistically, like it or not. So the lack of flexibility is going to hit women. The lack of flexibility is going to hit all kinds of disabled populations because for a variety of reasons, whether it's the physical disability or like a classic disability that people think of, the visible physical disability, or something less visible like long COVID, people will need more flexibility. And then neurodivergent people need more flexibility. Caretakers need more flexibility. Working students need more flexibility. So why is the barrier there to begin with? There might be some jobs where you're limited in your flexibility to the choice of shift. That at least give people the choice of shift. But most jobs we have now, who cares if you did it at 5 a.m. or 11 p.m. as long as we evaluate you based on your outcome? And that is going to remove barriers to many different people.
That's a radical. That you just threw that in as a radical change, and it's something that's close to my heart, which I think which is focusing more on outcomes than outputs. The other challenge I'd have linked to this is this sounds compelling, persuasive. in many cases intuitive when we take the time to think about this. Nevertheless, some people may be thinking, gosh, I've got a lot on already. I'm facing challenging market conditions. This looks like a big, big program of change. I guess first question, is it a big program? And secondly, where could you start? Where would you focus to get some momentum?
I get this question a lot. And some people say there is this one prescribed way to do things, and it has to start with, something big and, the whole change process. I don't think we have to do it the hard way. And I've actually seen a lot of effectiveness with starting wherever your particular pain point is. And for some organization, it could be the lack of flexibility. That's where they lose talent. That's where they lose their promising women. That's where they lose their promising Black and brown workers because they think they can find something. That's why they can't fire Gen Z. They can't hire enough Gen Zs because they don't give enough flexibility. So they need to plug that, and they need to maybe consider, how can we enable people to do jobs in more ways than one? And they might be able to bring in more talent and retain more of that talent. For another organization, it could be their promotion system. They might be losing their talent and getting bad reputation because their promotion system is biased in multiple ways, and people become frustrated and leave and not necessarily tell their family the best things about it. And so they might want to address this system. For some, it's hiring. Sometimes you need to start with hiring, but very often you want to look at your non-inclusive practices for your current employees and just ask your current employees. So the first principle of the Canary Code is participation. I like to make money. I like to be hired for consulting, but it's your employees who are going to tell you where the pain points are. I can help facilitate, maybe ask them in ways that they're going to trust me if they don't have that much trust in the organization. But they are the ones who know where the pain point is. And that is also how you bring people on board. If you address a pain point that many people suffer from, you're going to get a lot more support, and then you can maybe fix another thing and then another thing with more support.
Yes. I always thought you were a management consultant as well as an academic. And, that was a beautiful, beautiful plug for your role. I have to say that was seamless and that was beautiful. Just, you covered a number of myths and misconceptions in what we've been talking about. What else would go on your list where you hear a phrase, a word, a reflection, a comment, and you think, no, that's just wrong. You think of it a different way. What else would be on your list?
Yeah, one that annoys me is, so we need a specific sets of jobs. Which jobs are good for autistic people? Which jobs are good for dyslexic people? Which jobs are good for XYZ people? And we stopped asking that about women quite a few decades ago because that's not cool. And we don't want to say, okay, so women can only do XYZ jobs. I think we kind of stopped doing that after World War II and or shortly thereafter. We still do that to autistic people and dyslexic people as if they were all the same and only good at one thing. There's a full range of abilities among any kind of human group. And no, not all autistic people love math and programming. Some are, but many hiring programs focus on just that. And so what are we going to do if I'm an autistic person who is artistically inclined and creatively inclined? And for ADHDers, it might be, okay, so we're going to pigeonhole you into a creative career. And this particular ADHDer loves programming. So it just doesn't make any sense to pigeonhole people into particular occupations and then limit really their opportunities to those jobs, because those are very broad labels and all kinds of talents exist within those labels. So we need to think about how do we create workplaces that can use abilities and talents in the best way, regardless of labels.
That's very compelling. And if you look at yourself and you think philosophically for a moment, it's a question I ask all of my guests. What impact are you looking to have on the world around you, Ludmila?
Well, I'm very annoyed by unemployment rates among neurodivergent people, because 30 to 40% among all neurodivergent people are neurominorities, and up to 85% among autistic people with college degrees. It's just not acceptable. And there's some
Absolutely.
variance by countries. I would say Germany and Australia do a little bit better than UK, and UK does slightly better than the US, but still, those are ugly numbers. And there is no good reason. If people used valid measurement that's relevant to the actual job and not the ability test, I want to have a beer with you, because who even cares? Half of the jobs are hybrid or remote anyway. And in general, it's not an ethical way to select people that you just, the likability test. Look at their ability to perform the job and hire people based on their talents, not on someone's personal preferences. And I think that could make a huge difference. But it's also going to help organizations, because if you use valid measurement for selection, you will end up with stronger workforce.
So your contribution for that, and it is already a powerful contribution, will be, well, it's significant and meaningful. And when you're having your own best day, I hope today is one of them. When you're doing your best work, you feel great about everything. What are the mindsets and practices in particular? What helps you the most get to that place?
Well, I'm one of those people that goes into hyper focus. When I'm interested in something, I'm intrinsically interested in something, I'm just going to keep researching or working on something and making sure my format matches my content. And so really, I have quite a few interests. Whenever I just do something that aligns with my interests, and that includes, neurodiversity in the workplace and better leadership, I can be very happy doing that just because those things are intrinsically motivating. And it helps if I have a lot of freedom. There are some people who prefer more micromanagement, being told what to do, and maybe something that I would label micromanagement, other people would consider their desirable level of management. I prefer just have the general goal and let me figure out how to get there. Again, doesn't apply to everyone. And so generally, just give me an interesting task and freedom, and I'm probably going
You'll
to
go
come
for
up
it.
with something pretty cool. Not to be
Very good,
immodest or
very good.
anything.
No, well, you do brilliant work. As we draw to a close, what advice would you give to a typical CEO of an organization? Imagine you had a few minutes with her or him, and they were interested in this topic. They heard about your work, of course. They listened to this podcast, plug, and you had a few minutes, and they were willing to listen. What message would you like to convey to them?
I would probably ask them what is stopping them and what do they perceive as an obstacle to neuroinclusion specifically in their situation, because again, I don't like off-the-shelf advice that's going to work for everyone. So in their particular culture, there might be adherence to norms that have been there since 1960s. Or maybe in their culture, people have tried so many diversity initiatives in the last 5 years that they're just hitting the wall and thinking we can do another diversity initiative. So I would like to just figure out what it is that they perceive as an obstacle. And then if they just wanted to talk about change or how to not be afraid of working with different types of people, I'm happy to talk about that. But I usually like people to, at least to their best understanding of where they are, to pinpoint their issues, because we're all in a different place. There are some questions I can predict, like people who are starting at this field often do ask, how do we place people best? What is the best place for them? But maybe
Yes,
someone is in a
yes.
different place. Maybe they're just thinking of how to do this particular sort of flexibility that they haven't figured out yet.
But showing that curiosity and trying to understand where they are, what's stopping them, opens up a new series of conversations rather than giving them, as you say, a boilerplate set of recommendations. And I guess that's what I've taken most from this conversation, which is you make a persuasive case for the greater representation, inclusion, belonging of people from all aspects of neurodiversity, a compelling moral case, business case, human case. But more than that, you've moved on from what I often read professionally and personally is a series of simplifications, labels, generalizations into something that's much more specific. It's much more driven by the individuals in terms of what it takes for them to show their best more often, and how people can encourage them to be at their best, and what the conditions in their organization are to support that. I find it compelling, stimulating, and necessary. We need to do this better. Everyone listening needs to take responsibility to do this better and not think of it as somebody else's responsibility or the HR department's responsibility. We all play a role. I believe that very, very strongly. Where else can people find out about your brilliant work online?
I am most easily found on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty
Yes, you
active
are.
there.
Gosh, you
So
are.
yes, and usually there are issues with having a unique name, but in this particular case, I'm pretty easy to find as Ludmila Praslova. I do have a website that's pretty new, and it's just like my book, thecanarycode.com. I do have some additional resources there. The compilation of most of my articles, not all of them, but many of my articles are there on the same page. So you can just look by topics, whether it's bullying or neuroinclusion or long COVID and adjustments. So there's a variety of resources there, and we can also correspond. I'm pretty good at responding to emails and to DMs on LinkedIn, so
Okay,
I'm not
very good.
super hard to get a hold of.
And you write persuasively, accessibly, with a real clarity of a message, and your robustness, and that's quite a combination for an academic in particular, where often sometimes it becomes more technical or aspect. I mean, everyone can access and use your material, and I applaud you for that. So I'm grateful for you coming on this show. That was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Do check out the other episodes in this series. Sign up to the YouTube channel, the podcast. Give us a nice rating if you're feeling generous. And Ludmila, thank you ever so much again.
Thank you, David. It's been a great pleasure to be here, and I loved your questions.
Thank you ever so much.